Slovenian Chamber of Commerce, together with the British Embassy in Ljubljana, UK Science and Innovation Network, and the University of Mariboru. But before we start, let me take this opportunity to wish all of you mothers that are joining us today a very happy Mother's Day. We are here today to talk about the future of mobility and what is needed to deliver environmental goals. We have a lot of very interesting speakers from the UK and Slovenia, and it is with great privilege and pleasure that I introduce our special guest this morning first, who will give a welcome note to us, who will be joining us from the British Embassy in Ljubljana. Her Excellency, the British Ambassador to Slovenia, Ms. Tiffany Sadler, and the Minister of State for Trade Policy, Mr. Greg Hands. Good morning, Ambassador Sadler and Minister Hands.
Barbara. Thank you very much for your welcome, Barbara, and also for the message about Mother's Day. I have behind me some lovely flowers sent to me by my children from the UK, so it's wonderful to be celebrating Mother's Day. So you mentioned, Barbara, that this is a really interesting and important topic for us to discuss today around the future of green mobility. And in the context of the UK-Slovenian relationship, it brings together for me three interesting and important themes. And the first of those is around our science and innovation relationship, which in my 5 months here as ambassador, I've already seen so many examples of fascinating areas, whether it's about big data or whether it's about our research response to COVID. So a very rich relationship there for us to build on. And then secondly, our relationship around climate change. And it seems to me that the UK and Slovenia both share the same views on climate change. They both share the same commitment that we must respond as the international community to what is the greatest threat that is facing us at the moment. And then thirdly, it's about our trade and our business relationship, because business and trade are so important in terms of tackling climate change, in terms of tackling that threat. We can't do it as governments alone. We have to do it in cooperation with the private sector. And on that theme of trade and business, I'm absolutely delighted that we have here as our keynote speaker, the Minister for Trade Policy from the UK, Greg Hands. He's here on a visit to Ljubljana, and I've had the great pleasure of hosting him here for a couple of days. And it's a great pleasure to be having a team of reason together with him today. Minister.
Well, thank you, Tiffany, and thank you, Barbara, for those warm words of introduction. I'm delighted to be with you here today as our panel of experts discusses where the UK and Slovenia stand on the future of mobility and how tech and policy sectors can work together at home and beyond. And I have to say this is my fourth visit to Slovenia, my first time here as a government minister. I first came during independence in the summer of 1991. It's a great pleasure to be back, and it's a great place to be, particularly when discussing the environment. The backdrop of the mountains alone and the beautiful scenery in Slovenia reminds you immediately of the importance of the environment and combating climate change. So from planes and trains to cars and trucks, around a quarter of the world's carbon emissions are created by the ways that we all choose to get around. And with the number of cars on the roads globally set to double in the next 2 decades, the emissions from those cars will need to reduce significantly. The UK is going further and faster than ever to decarbonise transport, harnessing the growth of clean green technology to end the UK's contribution to climate change by 2050. So the UK will be net zero by 2050. Zero emission vehicles play an important role in this, as does renewable energy. These vehicles are already cheaper to run than petrol or diesel cars, and soon will be cheaper to buy as well. They also support public health by bringing cleaner air to our streets and can help countries reduce dependence on expensive oil imports. I should add that I'm also the Member of Parliament for Chelsea and Fulham in West London, where some of the worst air quality in Britain is to be experienced. So it's very much for me a personal priority as well. And I know there is plenty of ongoing innovation in Slovenia, including through companies such as Pipstrel and eCubes, who are doing some great work towards leading Slovenia towards its zero emissions goals. I'm impressed by the panel of experts who are gathered here today to discuss a range of important issues, such as alternative fuels, storage solutions, and infrastructure. But before handing over to those experts, I wanted to briefly talk about the role of governments in delivering green mobility. The UK government has introduced a phasing out of petrol and diesel cars. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced our 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution in November last year. As part of this, we will phase out sales of new petrol and diesel cars from the UK market by 2030, and all cars and vans will be fully zero emission at the tailpipe from 2035. Between 2030 and 2035, new cars and vans can be sold if they have the ability to drive a significant distance with zero emissions, such as plug-in hybrids or full hybrids. In addition to the 160,000 charge points already installed across the UK, we will invest £1.3 billion to accelerate further rollout, making us one of the largest networks in Europe for charging points. We will provide £582 million in grants, so that's almost 700 million euros, for those buying zero or ultra-low emission vehicles to make them cheaper to buy and incentivize more people to make the transition. We will also spend £500 million in the next 4 years for the development and mass-scale production of electric vehicle batteries. We are also trialling green number plates to increase awareness of cleaner vehicles on our roads and help local authorities bring in local incentives for green mobility. So the faster we act, the greater the benefits. We can improve people's health, create better places to live and travel in, and drive clean economic growth. We now stand on the verge of a green transport revolution, and to do this, we need a unique alignment of people and events. Brilliant engineers and entrepreneurs, cutting-edge new technologies, supportive governments, and the needs of citizens. Greening our transport infrastructure during the pandemic, following the pandemic, will help us become cleaner and more prosperous countries. The UK wants to use our presidency of COP26 this year to bring countries, states, industry, and businesses together to achieve this goal. If we work together, we can access all these benefits sooner. The UK is a world leader in green and smart technologies in areas such as mobility and energy, while Slovenia has significantly advanced its approach to smart cities and the circular economy. So there is a clear pathway for us to cooperate further. By sending a strong policy signal to the global industry, we can scale up investment faster, increase economies of scale, and accelerate cost reduction. So I look forward to hearing more today, and especially on how the UK and Slovenia can cooperate together on green mobility. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador and Minister Hands. We now heard about the role of government in green mobility. Let's now move to academia, from Ljubljana to Maribor, and let's hear what Matjaž Knez has to say, who is a professor from the Faculty of Logistics at the University of Maribor.
Hello to everyone from the Faculty of Logistics of the University of Maribor, and of course, right at the beginning, thank you to the organizers for the invitation and congratulations on organizing this event. I have been working a lot lately in the field of education on sustainable mobility and new green technologies, and I'm lucky to have been working with the Cubes company and with some other top names in the field of hydrogen. That's why I know what is happening on the side of technology development and what is being prepared, and because of that, I'm very happy and ambitious about the future. So let me share some of my thoughts with you today. Regarding the 2030 agenda and other environmental regulations by 2050, I would like to say that future reductions of CO2 emissions from passenger cars and heavy-duty vehicles will be strongly dependent on increased sales of alternatively powered vehicles, including electric, hybrid, and fuel cell vehicles. However, much remains to be done to achieve this. Of course, a lot depends on how developed and then the price competitive these new alternative green technologies are. Here I can say with a clear conscience that the technology is, in fact, already ready for the market. Accelerating the transformation can be added by a policy that makes firm and long-term commitments to establish a low-carbon mobility future, establish all the necessary conditions, and then unconditionally support it. Of course, it is also necessary to establish a market that will be environmentally and technologically aware and willing to start buying and using green technologies and then live sustainably. Let me mention our example. For the second year in a row, the Faculty of Logistics, University of Mariboru, together with the Cubes and partners, runs H2 Student, an educational program for young people. We teach them what sustainable mobility is, emphasizing hydrogen technologies. The youth well received the program, and by participating in the program, they acquire new sustainable and hydrogen competencies that will be key to the breakthrough of new technologies and climate goals. H2 Student is fully funded by the privately funded clean energy infrastructure project Zero Emission Mobility Corridor Slovenia, developed by Cubes and supported by Mitsubishi Power Europe and other partners. And I think there should be more like that, and I'm glad to be part of that. Emphasis must also be placed on educating and raising young people's environmental awareness and the general public. If people understand about our planet's future that we don't have a plan B, if politics gives a clear signal and supports green transformations by making encouraging regulations, then alternative green technologies and practices will come into our daily lives. Today's event is entitled "The Future of Mobility: Can Science and Technology Live Up to Policy Expectations on Zero Emission Mobility?" So, if you want my personal view on this topic, then I can clearly say that the development of alternative technologies is one way or another, however, a term always related to science and research. And we are already doing that. Industry and science have always worked together, which is good. Our task, the task of science and educational institutions, is to continue researching, working with industry, and educating young people. And what is very important, we must not be too late, and this is the role of politics. Politics need to be more ambitious, with a realistic delivery plan prepared by competent technology experts. So my concluding thought, the task of policy is now to create sustainable mobility conditions to happen. There is, in my opinion, no need to invent something new. Government just need to buy already available green and hydrogen technologies, and it is done. And my last thought, society leaders will have to take responsibility if they don't take a step in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matjaž Knez. We will now move to our panel discussions, and we have two panels planned. One is with policymakers and one is with solution providers. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you your moderator and invite him on stage, Borut Hočevar from Finance.
Barbara, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and very welcome to today's event. Many thanks also to our welcome speakers, Minister Hands, Ambassador Sadler, and Professor Knez. As Barbara said, there are two panels today, and on the first one we will talk to three policymakers. Two are coming from UK, one is from Slovenia. Then the short break will follow. But please stay with us because we have the arranged program during the break as well. And the second panel, there are 4 speakers, there are 4 solution providers. 2 are coming from UK and 2 from Slovenia. And yes, as Barbara says, I am Borut Hočevar. I work for Business Daily Finance. I edit environmental and energy pages there. So, I suggest we start with our first panel with with 3 speakers. They are Mr. James Fraser. He's a policy advisor at the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles at the Department for Transport in UK, of course. The second is Mr. Malte Werner. He's head of Automotive Innovation and Technology at the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And there is a Slovene one, Mr. Matjaž Vrčko. He comes from Sustainable Mobility and Transport Policy Directorate from Ministry of Infrastructure in Slovenia, of course. So, first of all, I ask all 3 speakers to tell us a little bit about their organizations and how their institutions are involved in sustainable mobility. Mr. Fraser, can I start with you, please? You come from the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, and what are main tasks of your office there?
Thanks, Bharat, and good to be with you all today. Thanks very much for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we do. So yes, I work in the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, which is part of the Department for Transport, and it's a team that works across government to support the transition to zero emission vehicles. We provide support for the take-up of zero emission vehicles, as well as funding to support charge point infrastructure across the UK. This will contribute to economic growth and help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution on our roads. And yeah, we're very ambitious in what we're doing and have recently changed our name actually from the Office for Low Emission Vehicles to the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, giving you an idea of us being at the forefront of this global transition to zero emission vehicles.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Werner, you're head of Automotive Innovation and Technology. Please introduce this unit to our audience.
Yes, of course. And hi, everyone. Again, many thanks for the invitation. I really look forward to a good discussion today. So I work for the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and my unit looks after the government's overall relationship with the automotive industry. And as James has just said, we also have 2 joint units together with the Department for Transport, which are the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles and the Center for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles, recognizing that the challenges and I think the opportunities that the transport sector is facing, particularly the automotive sector, really require us to work jointly and collaboratively across government, across different departments. My unit, which is the Innovation Technology Unit, really looks at the innovation ecosystem that we can offer businesses and academia to help to make sure that the UK is at the forefront of development, particularly zero emission technologies. The 2 kind of key things that I would just briefly single out is that we have a long-standing joint late-stage research and development support program together with industry, which is the Advanced Propulsion Center, which provides 1 billion of support for collaborative research and development projects. And we also have the £500 million Automotive Transformation Fund, which specifically seeks to provide research, development and capital support for strategically important technologies to help to accelerate the transition towards electric vehicles here in the UK.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vrčko, promoting sustainable mobility in Slovenia is a job of Ministry for Infrastructure. Can you tell us which are the main tasks, main goals of the ministry there?
Yes, thank you very much for the work, and thank you to invite me to this event. 2 years ago, our ministry established Transport Sustainable Mobility and Transport Policy Directorate with the 3 divisions: public transportation, sustainable mobility, and international affairs. So. From that time, I'm head of public transportation division, and we are now, let's say, planning next financial perspective from 21 to 27. As I said, I'm dealing with the public transportation. We will have this year call for new concession. My colleagues from Sustainable Division planning all kinds of, let's say, cycling, walking, alternative fuels, park and rides, and so on, while international affairs are now occupied the most with the EU Council presidency, which we will take over in the second half of this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vrčko. Well, it was nice to hear that all three our speakers are, in fact, at the forefront of the zero emission technologies and activities. Well, let's start again with you, Mr. Fraser. We have already heard that from the year 2030, there will be no more new petrol and diesel cars in the UK. How was that? That was a brave decision. How it was received by the public, and especially what was the answer of the automotive industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Perhaps I'll just give a little bit of context of how that decision came about before I answer that. Last year, we released a public consultation to sort of gather views on bringing forward the phase-out dates for new petrol and diesel cars and vans from 2040 to 2035 or earlier. And we received a lot of responses, actually over 1,000, from vehicle manufacturers, charge point providers, consumer groups, trade associations, and a lot of them were actually supportive of bringing forward the phase-out date, and we took that on board. And when we did announce the phase-out dates of 2030 for new petrol and diesel cars and vans, and for all new cars and vans to be zero emission at the tailpipe by 2035, there was a surprisingly large amount of support for it, actually. Fundamentally, I think vehicle manufacturers want certainty around what the sort of regulatory regime is going to be. And I think because we consulted very closely with vehicle manufacturers in particular throughout the process, they felt as if they had buy-in to, they felt as if their views were being heard. And they were certainly taken on board when we were making that decision. You know, we recognise, and perhaps Malta might discuss this as well, that, you know, the development cycle for vehicles is around 6 years. So bringing forward the phase-out date obviously has significant implications for them. But because we went for this approach of 2030 and 2035, it effectively allows some plug-in hybrids, for example, to be sold for a further 5 years after that first 2030 date. And really, that technology and that sort of window of time of 5 years is allowing vehicle manufacturers more of a transitional period to get their supply chains sustainable and frankly profitable for them after the phase out of pure petrol and diesel vehicles. So I think we were actually pleasantly surprised with the response from key stakeholders in industry. And I think the public support it as well. And there is an understanding that by being ambitious, we will be at the forefront of new opportunities for investment in industries such as the charge point sector, which is due to be worth around £56 billion in 2025, I believe. And so signalling that ambition early on, and the support package of £2.8 billion that we're providing has gone down well. Overall, because we're providing the platform for it to be achieved, and people recognise that there is an opportunity there by being at the front of these new technologies emerging.
Well, that's really very ambitious. Mr. Werner, with your first answer, you introduced your unit to us. But what are its most important goals, talking about the year 2030 and all the changes?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I really, I guess, what I would start with is really, I think, where James left off, or indeed echoing what he said. I think what we really recognize is what this is all about. It's about getting the balance between supply and demand right in the UK and indeed in Europe and globally. And secondly, getting the balance right between regulatory measures and also incentives and indeed support for industry. So it's, I think we're really clear that we do recognize that these targets that are being set are hugely challenging for industry, but at the same time, they present incredible opportunities for the UK, and they're undoubtedly, I think as we all agree here today, they are quite simply the right thing to do. They are a key part of that transition to net zero that all of our countries need to undergo. And with that in mind, that kind of getting that balance right, there are two key projects that I just earlier alluded to that we are taking forward. One is a core competition that we're running together with the Advanced Propulsion Centre, and I think we're very fortunate to have a colleague from there on the second panel. I hope I'm not stealing her thunder too much. And really what we're looking to do there as part of a comprehensive package of support for late-stage R&D we've been providing around £1 billion jointly by industry and government over 10 years. This has started in 2013. And it's specifically targeted at low carbon and zero emission vehicle technologies. So it's really looking at the whole vehicle value chain, including propulsion systems, lightweight vehicle and powertrain structures, energy storage, and power electronics. And something that's been really interesting to see is that since we've started running this over time, the balance has shifted really heavily towards zero emission products and technologies, and they now account for the vast majority of our funding. The second thing that I just very briefly, I think, want to talk about in this context is that what's really important is then moving from research and development, from this investment in technologies, towards industrialization, towards commercialization of these opportunities. And so as part of the 10-point plan, the government has announced last year the Automotive Transformation Fund, which is a £500 million investment that looks to develop at pace the next generation of cutting-edge zero-emission technologies here in the UK. The key emphasis of this is battery manufacturing, so-called gigafactories, but we're also looking at other strategic elements of the supply chain. And really, the target is here. We see this as a once-in-a-generation opportunity that will improve air quality, undoubtedly, but it will also help to protect and grow jobs across the automotive sector.
Well, thank you. Really a huge job. Mr. Vrčko, carbon emissions can be reduced if people travel less by their own cars and more by buses and rail. But because of COVID-19, people changed and they prefer now to travel by cars much more than before. What can be done to make public transport popular again?
Last year we were one of the member states which completely banned the public transportation for 3 months, 2 months in the summer and 1 month in the autumn. And yes, the people had to find a new way for the transportation. Probably some of them get new habits, new ways how to travel from home to the job, and yes, it would be difficult to get them back. Even our National Institute for Public Health announced to people that the public transportation is more risky, the most risky way that they can get the COVID-19. So that's another issue, and that people avoid the public transportation as well. So the objectives for the future regarding public transportation is not how to even grow the number of passengers, but rather how to, let's say, have the same amount as in 2019. So that's our goal now. how to get them back to the transportation the same amount it was in 2019. This year we will have a new call for the concession, and with this new call we will rise the standard. We will rise the number of kilometers for the public passenger transport regarding buses. We will try to rise also the quality of the fleet, and we will introduce alternative fuels also in the public transportation. There is some difficulties because we can introduce electric buses and vans regarding the urban mobility, but there's some difficulty regarding intercity transportation because there is only one solution. This is natural gas, but even with natural gas you have a distance at about maybe 200 kilometers, not more. And if we want to introduce this, we still need, regarding gas, we still need to let's say spread filling stations regarding the natural gas. But in the other hand, we this year expect the new alternative fuel directive, and it's question what let's say incentives will be there. So regarding alternative fuels in public transportation, there is still some questions, but that's, let's say, the main issues we are planning to do this year. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, this is in fact a global issue, tram bus versus personal cars. But now for our UK speakers, I have two questions, one for each of them. Questions have, let's say, Slovene color. First, Mr. Fraser, in our country, charging electric vehicles in large residential neighborhoods is quite a problem because people, they don't have their own parking places. How do you solve this issue in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. We recognise that on-street residential charging is something that is necessary for those consumers or would-be consumers who don't have dedicated off-street parking. And so we have a dedicated fund known as the On-Street Residential Charging Scheme, or ORCS, as we call it, which is an £80 million scheme which gives local authorities access to grant funding to install on-street electric vehicle infrastructure for those without off-street charging. And so this really helps with, as I say, those people who don't have parking spaces, and it provides more visibility to charge point coverage to people who are still skeptical that there is enough charge point provision to make the transition for themselves, because obviously that's something which needs to be changed in consumers' minds, that there won't be a shortage of charging opportunities during their journey or in destination points such as residential streets. And so that's a really important part of how we're addressing that. We're changing the scheme this year as well to sort of target people who would need it more so in certain areas and across certain price ranges on larger rollout projects. The other scheme that we have is the Electric Vehicle Home Charge Scheme, or EVHS, which provides £124 million of funding towards the cost of a charge point installation at a property with currently with dedicated off-street parking, but from 2022 we will be changing the scheme entirely so that it is entirely focused on leaseholders and renters, which means primarily people who live in blocks of flats who don't have dedicated charging. So that's a really good example actually of how government is changing and targeting their allocation of funding in a way which incentivizes consumers who don't have the privilege of off-street parking by providing them the possibility of charging outside their residence of their block of flats. And that will stimulate demand in the rental and leasehold sector and ensure that people living in that accommodation are also able to access EV charging provision at home. like the people who have off-street parking. So that's a good example of how we're shifting a scheme, a way to target people to increase uptake of vehicles so that they're not disincentivized by not having a reasonable opportunity to charge at home, which is ultimately where we see, the transition going, is people being able to charge at home overnight at very low cost, which will, hugely change people's perceptions of the viability of owning a battery electric vehicle. So yeah, the electric vehicle home charge scheme and the on-street residential charge point scheme, both working to combat that issue.
Yeah, this is an issue. Yeah, Mr. Werner, you are a government institution. You manage the public funds. How do you ensure that the public money delivers the best possible results?
Excellent question, and it's a difficult one. It's an ongoing challenge, to be honest. There's a couple of just 2 or 3 points that I would make in response to this. One is that I don't think it is right for government to be in the space of picking technologies or second guessing necessarily. So we deliberately have a model that relies on co-investment by government and industry. And really the idea behind that is that we're not going to fund something solely in a direction where, certainly in the R&D space, that doesn't correlate with where things are going. And really what this helps to do is actually it can create spillover effects that you cannot possibly foresee beforehand. So we've frequently seen technologies developed through some of our automotive research and development programs, which ended up having much wider applications, and they would have then supported decarbonization of modes of transport. You can, for instance, see batteries for electric vehicles being reused to then support demand for stationary energy storage applications, which will require less frequent battery cycling. So that, I guess what I'm saying is, there really are effects that go much wider, and it's really important that we're guided by industry and by scientific progress. Our delivery partner, the Advanced Propulsion Center, are also involved in developing industry roadmaps, which really provide detailed kind of snapshots, points in time of where industry sees the transition going across the different types of vehicles. And it's important there to recognize that suitable technologies will also vary, and therefore funding will have to vary depending on the type of vehicle that happens. The second point that I just want to briefly make on that is that we absolutely, as government, we recognize that we cannot do this alone. There's simply no point in us seeking to replicate industry expertise if it's already there. And so working closely with the Advanced Propulsion Center is absolutely key to this. They're rooted in industry. They have an excellent relationships and an excellent strategic understanding. And so really what we do is, together with the APC, we make sure that we support applicants all the way from pre-application stage through the course of the program. And it means that we get to work with the right people. We have a much higher success rate of applications than we would otherwise have, and there's a much better understanding between industry and government of where we're heading and how we can best support, which then in turn enables us as government to make the money that we have go further and to foster stronger relationships along the way.
Well, yes, this is an important message for our institutions. Thank you. Mr. Vrško, for you, a global-oriented question. The transport emission growth when the GDP grows. This is the case in most countries all around the world. What can we do to decouple those two growth, to decouple emission growth from the GDP growth?
Well, that's the question. I mean, okay, the decoupling was it's a long story. Already in 2000, Commission in the White Book on Transport put decoupling as an objectives, but then 6 years later we again have started to talk on commodality and so on, and this is actually even now still that 1% of growing GDP cause between 1 and 2% growing transportation. So, and well, I think that with the global worlds, when the people and goods travel around the world, we cannot decouple GDP and transport. And I'm convinced that we would need to change not only habits of the people regarding how and what to use for the transport, but also the economic paradigm. I mean, as I said, if goods travel around the world, then we will have more and more transportation. Just imagine, for Slovenia, our transport models show that the good transportation, freight transport will grow between 60 and 80% up to 2030, and the transportation of people around 30%. So, and that's mean that even if we will have a model shift to environmentally friendly modes of transport, I think that the answer to your question is that we should think about how to change other sectors, because the transport is just a service for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we have only 2 minutes left, and I would like to finish this discussion with you, Mr. Fraser. The UK will host COP26 climate conference later this year. What can the mobility sector expect from the conference?
Yeah, well, we're very excited to be hosting COP26, obviously postponed from last year. It will be hosted in Glasgow, and I can speak primarily about the Zero Emission Vehicles campaign, which will be part of that event, which aims to double the pace of the transition to zero emission vehicles by encouraging ambitious commitments from businesses, industry, national and subnational governments. So through that Zero Emission Vehicles campaign of COP26, there will be a real push at both private and public sector levels through our leadership to sort of encourage other commitments which are ambitious, much like our own Net Zero 2050 commitment that Minister Hands set out earlier at the beginning of this event. And so that campaign will convene governments representing almost half of the global automotive market to create a forum for sustained cooperation and provide governments with access to international expertise as they make decisions about the long-term direction of their domestic markets. So there's very much a push there to bring together a large part of the vehicle manufacturing market and collaborate in a way which is conducive to the transition globally being done in a sustainable and prompt manner, which will benefit prices of zero emission vehicles all across the world, and developing ways to reduce costs of vehicle manufacturing parts such as battery production, for example. And so yes, the Zero Emission Vehicles campaign of COP26 will have a real push there to continue our leading by example with our ambitious phase out dates for new petrol and diesel cars and vans, and our 2050 net zero commitment for the UK economy as a whole.
Thank you. That was my last question. Thank you to all three speakers, Mr. Fraser, Mr. Werner, and Mr. Vrčko. Thank you for all your answers. We got a lot of new information, and most important, I think, now in Slovenia, we are aware now how heavily the UK government supports, how heavily invests in the low-carbon automotive industry. Thanks again, and I invite you to stay with us till the end of the event. And now there is our Minister for Mrs. Kustec. She's responsible for social and education and some other things as well, and she will have a short speech.
Dear Minister, dear ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and pleasure for me to be part of this interesting and very actual event organized by the British Embassy in Ljubljana. Even though still on a distance due to the existing circumstances, I would like to share a couple of thoughts in the light of your today's very interesting conference and discussion. The EU has adopted a sustainable and smart mobility strategy in December. It is certainly a huge effort by which the Union sets up the pathway to put the European transport on track for the more promising future. In the vision of the strategy, there is clearly written that mobility and transport matters to all of us. And from my perspective, from the research perspective, it is also very important to stress and emphasize how those two goes hand in hand with the role of research. And it is actually very important as well that the EU emphasized the very close need for the collaboration also beyond its borders. And here we can see that we can be successful in this European Green Deal together, not only inside the European Union member states, but much broader, also in the framework of the UN and all our other countries with which we do collaborate, especially with the UK. When we are speaking about digital and green transitions, there are many topics and issues that needs to be addressed. And greening mobility is definitely one of them. Digitalization will become an indispensable driver for the modernization of the entire system as well. And if we want to be successful, we need to do this together with all the research innovations and ideas that we share. And therefore, we see this need to, in a way, connect the green topics with the research topics as one of the fundamentals of the existing times. It became very obvious that we must shift the existing paradigm of incremental change to fundamental transformation. And there is a lot of opportunities and challenges for the research and innovation to deliver. In its flagship 7, the strategy defines the role of innovation, data and artificial intelligence for smarter mobility, shaping our future mobility by developing and validating new technologies and services is a new challenge for the EU and each member state of the Union. And another challenge shared is the role in the wider international community. The Commission committed itself to drive the research and deployment of innovative and sustainable technologies in transport. We support it in these endeavors. Investment in disruptive solutions will enable for important breakthroughs and environmental gains in the future. Horizon Europe is therefore instrumental for the future deployment, and the United Kingdom will, in this sense, definitely remain to be a part of the program, bringing together best knowledge from both sides of the English Channel. Modernized digital infrastructures and artificial intelligence are becoming essential for transport automation in all modes, with digital technologies and components. Together, we must create an artificial intelligence ecosystems of both excellence and trust. Allow me to proudly mention in this regard that the UNESCO International Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, based in Ljubljana, is kicking off their activities exactly this Monday on March 29. And let me conclude by thanking the British Embassy to organize such an interesting debate on very pertinent issues that are going on today. Thank you for your attention. I wish you a successful discussion, and I wish you to stay healthy and well also in the future.
Many thanks to Mrs. Kustec, Minister for Science, Education and Sport here in Slovenia. Now there is a break. It's 10 minutes long, but please don't go away, because it's not a break for commercials, it's a break with a program. First, there is Mr. Keith Budden. He's from UK non-profit organization Cenex. His organization supports innovation in low-carbon mobility and advises companies on the transition to low-carbon transport as well. So, Mr. Budden, the screen is yours.
Support we can provide and how we can increase collaboration and trade and partnership working between the UK and Slovenia. Hopefully my slides should come up on the screen now. Is that going to happen? Perfect. Thank you very much indeed. Right, so we were established in 2005 by the UK government to help the transition to zero emission mobility. We provide both consultancy advice and collaboration research and development projects, and in particular around the Horizon Europe programme and the fuel cell programmes across Europe. We currently run the main fuel cell trials for the European Commission in Northern Europe. I'm very interested in developing those technologies and running trials and demonstrators in Slovenia as well. We also operate out of the Netherlands and Korea, and we run the low carbon vehicle event on behalf of the UK government in September, which is on the route to COP26. It's in its 14th year now and is a major showcase of new technologies in the sustainable transport space. So please do come along and have and see what technology is available and hear the presentations at the event in September. Again, this demonstrates the breadth of the work we do with our 40 staff based in the UK, in the Netherlands, and now in Spain as well, with a whole range of support activities. And again, there are numerous organisations who can provide that professional specialist advice and guidance to enable you to bring these products and services to market. What I want to do now is just talk about some of the technologies that are currently working on the road in the UK now, with companies that can work with you and share their learning and experiences both in operating the new vehicles, but also how they form part of an integrated mobility system and an integrated energy system. The shift from petrol and diesel means we have to think about how vehicles better integrate into our energy system, which is challenges we haven't faced in the past. So here's just a view of some of the vehicles that are being manufactured and operated within the UK, both electric and hydrogen. And you can see from the iconic London electric taxi to the Nissan Leaf made up in Sunderland, the Optare electric bus operating in Nottingham, hydrogen buses operating in Scotland and being manufactured in Northern Ireland, electric refuse collection vehicles operated in London, manufactured in the Midlands, and hydrogen trucks being developed in Scotland as well. So a range of different technologies. It's not just cars, it also is trucks and buses and a range of different types of vehicles now with zero tailpipe emissions. So again, it's not just about the car, it is about the full mobility system. But it's also about how you charge and provide power to those vehicles. So fantastic innovations around electric forecourts of 30 filling points or charging points for electric vehicles. First major development in Braintree with power up to 350 kilowatts linked with solar and with battery storage. There's some really innovative ways of refueling vehicles when you're on the move. Demonstrations, in fact, one we're working on around wireless charging of taxis so they can pick up additional charge when they're queuing and waiting for passengers. And then innovations around pop-up charge points, in particular in some of the historic cities in Slovenia where you may not want charging infrastructure on the road. Charge points that can pop up out of the ground have significant benefits for those type of areas. And additional innovation around vehicle to grid. My team working at Cenex are very much involved in seeing how the electric vehicle battery in the vehicle can integrate into the energy system and provide that additional support to the low voltage grid. We're currently involved, and actually a seminar on at the moment is the findings of the world's largest domestic vehicle to grid trial, again, been very well supported by the UK government. work on connected and autonomous vehicles, so bringing different technologies together. In particular, the pod on the right is being trialled at a number of airports. Again, brings different value and cost savings and efficiencies. And I know there's a lot of opportunities within Slovenia, within your IT sectors and sensor sectors within to develop collaboration around connected and autonomous vehicles. It's not just about vehicles, it's also about how they integrate into the mobility system. So work on mobility hubs, the integration of small scooters, shared vehicles, so vehicles that aren't necessarily owned by the driver, but you just rent them when you need them. And then developing that whole mobility ecosystem, that mobility as a service processes. So many trials, the designs at the top are going to be implemented in Plymouth in the near future. Other projects being developed in Nottingham. But again, it's bringing together different transport modes to make it easier for people to not need the car for every journey, but to use a car as is appropriate for part of the journey, for part of that travel system. We can also in the UK provide many professional support services, including ourselves as a not-for-profit, but also organisations like Ricardo, who are world leaders in developing new electric vehicle and hydrogen technologies, support organisations like Field Dynamics, who are experts on identifying locations for electric vehicle charging, support organisations like Urban Foresight, who've been helping develop support programmes for industrialisation and led a lot of work in Scotland about attracting inward investment. Element Energy, who are global leaders on hydrogen vehicles and have led and developed many of the successful Horizon Europe and Fuel Cell Joint Undertaking programmes. The Energy Saving Trust also not-for-profit similar to ourselves, again providing advice on how you integrate electric vehicles and mobility systems into buildings, and Delta Energy providing high-level strategic advice and guidance around the strategies for integrating low-emission vehicles into the energy system. So again, there's significant policy, expertise, strategy advice and support available to help Slovenia on your journey to zero-emission mobility. So again, bringing the vehicles, it's bringing the systems, and it's bringing the professional support together, learning in partnership with experts from Slovenia, and developing a zero-emission mobility services and support packages that work for all of us. Yeah, climate change does not just affect the UK, does not just affect Slovenia. It's something we have to resolve together in a way that provides cleaner, better transport for our citizens and enables us to move freight and goods in a much more sustainable and cleaner way. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Budden. I enjoyed your presentation. However, I have a question for you. It's yes/no question. You're an advisor to the companies regarding the sustainable mobility. Can you advise Slovenian companies as well?
Yes, we can. All the different organizations I mentioned there are able and willing to support companies in Slovenia. We cannot do that with the support of the UK taxpayer, so we would have to charge for our services, but we will be very willing and able to support businesses and the public sector in Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Budden. I wish you successful business, and I invite you to follow us until the end of this event.
Thank you very much.
The break is not over yet. We have made a short video where the experts will talk about sustainable mobility. Please.
And now, let's hear from the people who are designing the mobility solutions of tomorrow. Policy or technology? Which is driving the race to zero-emission mobility?
Of course, there is a symbiosis, but for vehicle technology, I believe that right now policy is driving the race. Setting a date for the phase-out of internal combustion engine vehicles creates the urgency to which engineers and technologists are responding.
Well, I would rather say price, considering that from 5 years from now onwards, zero-emission vehicles will become cheaper to buy, cheaper to run, cleaner, healthier, and also, if I may say, cooler. But you know, it is good to raise why mainstream forecasters expect combustion technologies to dominate sales in the next 20 and 30 years. I think this is the right question.
I think technology is ready, policies knows what to do. The problem is industrialization and manufacturing. So we are lacking of skilled people, we are lacking of factories that will produce what is already existing.
Do you see any clear winners amongst the technologies leading us to the path of zero-emission mobility?
Electric vehicles and hydrogen as a fuel hold a lot of promise for shared ownership and shared mobility, but not just yet for sole ownership. In fact, replacing millions of diesel and petrol cars with electric vehicles isn't a feasible solution either. But we do need a multimodal approach like mobility as a service with a much smaller overall vehicle fleet.
I think that the clear winners is really dependent on the infrastructural development, because that's like, you're actually putting in the support for a system to grow. And at the moment, different versions of electric vehicles seem to be looking like the winners, partly because of the ease of use of the technology and the growth of that.
Availability of green vehicles won't be enough to achieve zero-emission transport. Should policymakers focus more on infrastructural developments instead?
As an urban and regional planner, I believe that we can build very attractive cities and enjoy very fulfilling lifestyles around zero-carbon modes, such as walking and cycling.
I think that the other aspect of that infrastructure is that sustainable mobility, which is the bigger discussion, is not just about the vehicles. So when we talk about infrastructure, are we also talking about the idea of city forms, about walkable cities, about micromobility, about how accessibility to amenities and services is actually designed? And within that, there's the idea of green vehicles. And whether that's public or private, it's still within the wider context of accessibility within cities.
Sustainable mobility should take into account the entire life cycle of vehicles. Do we pay enough attention to this side of the coin?
Well, for manufacturers, production is always under the sustainability radar because it costs them directly. So once the product is sold, then comes the massive gap in that monitoring. However, recently, some of the EV producers like Tesla and Volkswagen are planning a large-scale energy storage facility for the 6 to 8 million EV batteries that will annually retire by 2030. So nevertheless, we need further interventions like a policy landscape because we are not reaching net zero if life cycle emissions aren't considered serious enough.
Researchers, we are aware of this problem already for decades, or even more than a decade, and we are working to solve this problem, to develop technology which will have a low CO2 footprint and technology that will be sustainable and cheap and also available to community.
Curious, what do you currently see as the biggest challenge to green mobility, policymaking and technological development?
Well, as I see the situation, maybe regional collaboration. Renewable sources are depending on regional specifics and are not limited by national borders. In Europe, policymakers should primarily rely on energy companies and logistics entities where technology companies have a challenge to develop a business model and demonstrate the competitive total cost of ownership.
I will give you an unconventional answer. I believe it is society's belief in the sanctity of the privately owned family car, which can be driven anywhere, anytime, and that the external costs imposed on others and on the planet never need to be paid. They do need to be paid, and we do need to change. And this is the biggest challenge.
The UK has announced phasing out sales internal combustion engine cars and vans by 2030. Can the industry and infrastructure meet this goal?
I have no doubt that the industry will be able to meet this deadline. Manufacturers like Volkswagen and BMW have officially announced their phase out of ICE vehicle lines 2022 onwards. The real question is if we have the infrastructure to support this transition, considering this phase out is just for the manufacturers and not for the car owners.
The hopeful answer is yes, but I think the reality is much more likely to be a compromise through further clarification of the different types of hybrid vehicles and different options that are available. I wouldn't be surprised if there were new vehicle types and classes that were invented to fit into these gaps and loopholes that will exist when the regulation is more detailed?
Some segments might lag behind with the development and deployment to the market, but of course with the increased need there will be increased industrialization, and with that I'm pretty much sure that we can reach this goal by 2030.
By setting these goals, UK government is demonstrating strong leadership towards a clean energy future. We can learn from history that industry can quickly adapt to new circumstances if the business model is clear.
I hope you enjoyed this video. It was made by UK Science and Innovation Network in cooperation with the British Embassy in Ljubljana and British-Slovenian Chamber of Commerce. And thank you to all the experts who took part in the video. Now we go to our second panel. We have all speakers, solution providers for green mobility. Our speakers are Mrs. Philippa Oldham, Stakeholder and Engagement Director at Advanced Propulsion Center in UK, Mr. Alexander Gerbec, Director of Private Company Ecubes from Slovenia, Mr. Guilherme Johnston, he is Head of Global Partnership in Connected Places Catapult from UK, and Mr. Gaspar Gantar, Professor at Environmental Protection College from Slovenia. Mrs. Oldham, please let me start with you. The APC Center works closely with the government, with the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Can you tell us how this cooperation look like?
Yes, good morning. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me along, and happy Mother's Day to all those mothers out there. So yeah, as Malta touched on in the first panel, the Advanced Propulsion Centre was formed in 2013, and we're very much about that relationship between industry and government, looking at how we can accelerate and develop the technologies going forward by supporting the UK and international automotive sector accelerate in terms of the transition towards net zero. We do this in a number of different ways. Firstly, through the funding that is provided through both the APC project competitions and also the Automotive Transformation Fund that Malta touched on, but also by looking at the insight piece. So we develop and work with industry to develop the roadmaps that Malta touched on that cover all of the different technologies that will help with that acceleration, but also look about the product and the vehicle type. So we cover everything in the technology side, from electrical energy storage, so batteries, power electronics, e-machines, fuel cells, lightweighting, but also the product side. So that includes buses, off-highway, passenger car. And we look at out to 2040 in the technology side of things. So really look at where those opportunities are for both industry and government to work together. And from the product side, looking at working with the vehicle manufacturers themselves to, again, help develop their strategy. And then we can make sure that the funding is appropriate coming from government, but also working to help de-risk those companies invest and accelerate their product portfolio.
Thank you. Mr. Gerbec, let's move to you. Your company, Ecubes, had a project in Indonesia. It was supported by the British government. Can you describe this project to us, please?
Yes, of course. Good morning to everyone. Project in Indonesia was an extraordinary experience. So initially, we have understood challenges with power supply in Indonesia, with over 13,000 islands and with over 280 million inhabitants. And the government of province of South Sumatra had a vision to develop clean energy in their province. So they gave us opportunity to deliver a remarkable project based on hydrogen technologies, as a part of the Asian Games, which is one of the globally largest sports events. And as a part of the program, EQUBES Arcola, in a partnership also together with Imperial College, we have also delivered hydrogen education program at that time. So this project in Indonesia had a very strong impact on our evolution. And, but also it's very important to say at this moment here that the Department for International Trade has played an extraordinary important role in supporting this project. Minister Greg Hands, I'm using this opportunity to thank you for all the support at the time. This was in 2017 and 18, and thanks to you and all your team. For other guests, Minister Greg was already at that time Minister for Trade Policy in the Department for International Trade. But it's interesting how this project has started, because it's good to learn maybe for some decision makers also from these cases. When we have met Governor for South Sumatra, Mr. Alex O'Neill, he said South Sumatra is rich with coal, oil and gas, but apologies, but we want to go green with renewables. And they did a remarkable project. So we're talking about the year 2016. It is 5 years from now since this was what he said, and it's almost 3 years since the project was delivered. And we are talking about South Sumatra province in Indonesia with over 10 million inhabitants. So it demonstrates the strong leadership is required, determination and efforts for the clean energy future of the local governments. So for us, this project was really important. It gave us experience to move forward also in Europe. On other developments, it was essential experience also for the RES Hub development, which is today approved by a Pan-European Defense Project.
Well, Mr. Gervais, thank you very much. It is really an interesting project in Indonesia. Mr. Johnston, I'm sure that many very good projects came out from your catapult, but can you pick up one or two and tell us a bit more to us about them?
Sure. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you all for the invitation. Yeah, so as Connected Places Catapult, so our main role is to accelerate innovation in places, cities, and transport, and we also receive support from the UK government. But in terms of projects, so I can pick maybe one or two. So one interesting one that we've been delivering right now is called Simulate. And we are working with local authorities in the UK and also solution providers to find innovative solutions for green mobility. So we run challenges through an acceleration program, and then we select companies from the UK that can provide these solutions to specific challenges in different parts of the country here in the UK. So it can be micro mobility. It can be other types of solution providers, can be like how to connect with sensors to improve air quality, both indoor and outdoor air quality. But it's really about working together with solution providers, government, so that can together find the best solutions for the challenges that local authorities are facing. So this is in the UK, but we also work very largely internationally. So we also have some, for example, a project in India called Innovating for Clean Air, where we're working with the city of Bangalore to address one of the main challenges that they have there, which is a very poor air quality. Therefore, we're also working together with local stakeholders in India and in the UK to find innovative solutions for the clean air. And we are even now sort of like closing one street every Sunday in Bangalore, so we can deploy and test different technologies that can improve air quality, which is new and innovative, and we hope to improve air quality by doing that. So these are just two of the examples, two projects that we've been currently implementing.
Well, thank you. It's always great to listen to how such projects are growing. Professor Gunter, well, many studies have addressed the impact of electric vehicles, of petrol vehicles and of diesel vehicles, and they compare their climate impacts. How is this in Slovenia? Because, I mean, results of those studies depend very much on the electricity mix.
Yes, hello. Hello from Velenje, from Environmental Protection College. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the question. Yes, as you said, first thing is that if you want to compare different products, you have to do it in a systematic way and in the whole life cycle. And when we are talking about vehicles, it's very important how the electric vehicles are charged. What is the energy mix of the country where this is done? So that is why we performed LCA analysis with the Slovenian input data. This is nothing new, all countries have done this before, but we did this for the Slovenian input data. And our results are showing that also in Slovenia, with our electricity mix, the battery electrical vehicles are much better than petrol or diesel driven brothers. Just for example, carbon footprint of the electric vehicle, it's 10 tons at the moment when the customer is buying it. Internal combustion engines of the, let's say, middle class car, Volkswagen Golf or something like this, it's much lower. It's only 5 to 6 tons of carbon footprint. But then during the use, we did our calculation for 300 kilometers use. This is like, let's say, an average life of the car. Some are last much longer. Some are destroyed in the accidents much earlier. But during the use, the electric car is so much better that he catches his colleagues, internal combustion engines, let's say petrol engine in Slovenia after 20,000 kilometers, and then gas-driven vehicles, is it like compressed natural gas or liquefied petrol gas, after approximately 75,000 kilometers. So it's clear that electrical vehicles are better. Some studies before in Slovenia were showing that maybe this is not the case, but we believe it is. So even the gas-driven internal combustion engines are worse for the environment. And as we said before, the potential of these electric vehicles is so much better because the efficiency of internal combustion engine will slightly improve, but not much. But on the other side, the production of the electricity can be so much better in Slovenia. And maybe only the last comment, colleagues before, they all talked about zero emission vehicles, but they were very careful. They said zero emissions at the tailpipe. Yeah, that's exactly very important. So as I said, electric car produces 10 tons of carbon footprint without driving 1 kilometer. So this means that if we are taking into the account the entire life cycle, we cannot go much lower than, let's say, approximately 30 to 35 grams per kilometer, even if it's, let's say, filled with clean electricity.
Thank you, Professor. Well, I have wrote out articles about many such analyses, and they are all so complicated to me. I mean, you can take figures this way or another way, and you get a result, whatever you want. It seems to me like this. But okay. Mrs. Oldham, your first answer was very important information for us how government and private institutions can cooperate. But your APC Center also supports researches in large companies. Can you tell us more about that part of your program?
Yeah, so I mean, very much I think that the key here is the research that's happening across the organisations and where we're starting to see a change in the way the automotive sector has essentially developed in the past. They're very much driven by a lot of what was happening in the large OEMs, so the global manufacturers. But as we shift to these various new technologies to meet the net zero targets, the relationships are changing. And actually what we're seeing is a cross-fertilisation across the sectors in terms of research and development. And part of this happens when you move out of the passenger car market but look into the heavy duty off-highway and bus and coach areas, because actually those sectors are potentially harder to, or those vehicles are harder to electrify, partly due to the size of the battery that may be required, and also the range that these vehicles do. So that's where you start to look at other technologies such as fuel cells. And I think that we're starting to see a lot of relationship building between the aerospace, rail, maritime sectors and the automotive sector to look at how we can accelerate these innovations. And also linking to this, we're seeing a greater relationship between academia and industry, and really looking at how the academic researchers across the UK can push the boundaries of some of those manufacturers and essentially address some of those challenges. So we're working with them to look at where we can help support in terms of development, where we can set up research and development facilities and potentially investment in capital through things like the Automotive Transformation Fund, but also the APC projects, because they tend to have those partnerships as part of the consortium to really grow some of these solutions and accelerate them. I think Professor Ganter picked up there on the importance of life cycle analysis. Whilst batteries are fantastic, obviously, at reducing the tailpipe emissions, they take a lot of energy to produce. And so really addressing the grid and the mix of the grid as they are manufactured is a key aspect of this, but also looking at the other end of the scale in terms of the recycling aspect of it, understanding that to recycle products also takes energy, and understanding where the value is in terms of the flow of the embedded carbon across the different materials, and working across the sectors to understand various waste streams, and recognizing that one sector's waste is another sector's resource. And I think, again, that's a change that we're starting to see across industry and across the engineering landscape as we move forward, and is a really important aspect as we help to deliver on the net zero targets, but also particularly this year in sort of the road towards COP26, and looking at how as an international perspective we can really address some of these challenges, and use our energy more efficiently and use our resources more efficiently. So supporting that research to enable us to be more efficient and help mitigate the impacts of some of the development of these technologies.
Yes, thank you. The research in large companies is really very important for the zero emission transport. Mr. Gerbets, you cooperate with Slovenian Army. And what kind of a project is this? As far as I know, also Japanese corporation Mitsubishi cooperates there.
This defense project is basically a project which was prepared by Slovenian Ministry of Defense and was approved for realization by European Defense Agency. This is the project where the defense sector has identified, discovered that sector coupling is important to enhance their main user requirement, which is capability. They are thinking very deeply also on the forthcoming challenges, also threats, I would say, as a possible consequences on the climate change. And of course, new technologies in new world will be required. So basically, maybe I should go a few steps back. When we met with Colonel Shipets for the first time, actually in 2018, in only a few minutes, it was found out that linking this civil clean energy project based on hydrogen technologies with user requirements from defense sector, society can get an energy storage project where critical subsidies for renewable energy, for energy storage, might not be required anymore. So that's why we got very interested about this possible collaboration. Because ResHub represents opportunity to develop entirely new infrastructure in a partnership between civil and the defense sector. So such an approach enables defense sector to be more to enhance capability, and for the civil sector enables the deployment of energy storage without critical subsidies. So in terms of the collaboration with Mitsubishi, is so that we have, when we introduced for the first time this approach, we had the opportunity to meet some key persons in charge of strategic developments from the Mitsubishi Power Group, and they have foreseen that this kind of approach can really deliver solutions that can bring hydrogen technologies on the market. So we see this defense sector as extremely important, because when European Defence Agency has approved this project, this was in May 2019, we have been convinced that the largest buyer of hydrogen is born. This is European Defence. And really, after only a few months later on, a strong boost for hydrogen started to happen on the market. So I'm pretty convinced that this is going to be visible within 5 to 10 years. The impact of the RESCA project, which is today approved, the European Defence project, but it's led with the Slovenian Ministry of Defence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gerbert. We are coming to the end. Just a short question for you, Mr. Johnston. COP26, it was mentioned several times here today. Is the catapult taking part of it?
Yes, it's, as has been discussed, is quite an important, of course, international event in terms of the climate commitments, where important decisions will be taken, and it's definitely an opportunity to demonstrate all the work that has been done by the UK and internationally. So we are already working with the City of Glasgow and other partners from the Scottish Government, from other stakeholders, and we will be there, of course, showcasing some of our activities, some of our work, and also I think it's important moment to demonstrate that technology is important to solve different challenges related to net zero, but also the technology must be always centered into people, into challenges that people face. So we will always have this view that technology must be enabled, people-centered and technology-enabled when you try to deliver some of these challenges. And I think it will also be an opportunity to demonstrate how policy can work into addressing net zero challenges. For example, how cities can develop their own policies to reduce air quality, to improve air quality, such as what's being done in London with the ultra-low emission zones and other cities around the world. So I think it will be definitely a very important milestone as as different countries are trying to reach their own net zero targets. But I think particularly as well for cities and local authorities to demonstrate how important they are when they are trying to address climate change challenges. Because without local authorities, without cities, we're never gonna reach our targets.
Well, thank you. And just for the end, I ask our British guests. We were talking about electrical mobility, about hybrid technologies, about hydrogen. There are some new technologies coming. Just pick one that, in your opinion, will be the most important for mobility in 10-year times. Just one. Mr. Johnston, please be the first.
Yeah, for me, a project that they're quite active now, it's even in sustainable aviation. So I would say that it's a quite important moment, like in the future of flight, how we can decarbonize aviation. So I think it's something that we're thinking about. So in 10 years' time, I think there will be a lot of new technologies, a lot of new modes that we can really help decarbonize the way we currently fly. So I would say that the future of flight is quite an important one, and there are a lot of technologies and trends that are applicable to that.
And Mrs. Oldham, the last word is yours. Which technology will be the most important in 10 years' time?
I don't know if I can pick a technology. I just pick the approach, and to me that's addressing the life cycle, and I think that's actually more important, that we learn from our mistakes of the past and don't just focus on one aspect of the life cycle, but take into account the total emissions that are related to our products, going forward in our different transport modes. And to me, that's a change in the way that we design and develop and manufacture our products. And actually, I think that is more important than any of the technologies that we use. And it's more about that approach to hopefully to learn our lessons from the past and improve the future.
Well, thank you very much. That was my last questions. We reached the end of today's event. Many thanks to all our speakers and all our guests. We've got a lot of very important new information and an idea what is going on in the UK in the green mobility. And for the end, I see how hard you work on the COP26 event, and I keep fingers that this will be a great success, not only for UK but globally. Thank you very much. Bye. And Barbara, please take the floor.
Thank you so much, Borut, for this great moderation. Thank you so much, distinguished guests and panelists, for joining us today for this really interesting discussion. I hope that this will be a base for more future cooperation between the UK and Slovenia in climate change, in green mobility. And last but not least, thank you so much for joining us, dear participants, dear ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you will stay well and healthy, and I hope that you will join us at our future events, which hopefully will be live or at least hybrid. Have a great day.